is a most beautiful and fruitful country, as pleasant a land as one can tread upon.
The Native Americans called it the river that flows two ways, because of course the Hudson is a tidal river, it's an estuary, and geologically, for much of its course, it's more like a fjord than a river. It flushes in and out with the tides from the ocean.
Well, the Hudson River is a very special river. It's important to America because, for one thing, it was one of the very first points of contact for the Native Americans with people from overseas, sailors, traders from overseas. And our whole history is tied into that beginning.
It's hard to put into words how important the Hudson is to this area, probably to the state. From the early Dutch onward, the Hudson River was the way that they settled Albany, the way they moved products, the way they moved beaver skins, the way they brought products back that the people needed. It is a whole panorama of the history of the river that was meant to be a way of moving things and people and populating it.
When I come down here, I try to let those things dissolve. I try to lose the connection with the present and try to see what this may have been without the cars, without the highway, without the buildings, without the noise, in a time that was much, much slower, much quieter, in some ways much more beautiful, and in some ways much, much more dangerous.
The painting, The Trading House, that Len Tantello did, depicts probably the first structure in New York State. That little fort was built on Castle Island in 1614. And although there might have been huts at Manhattan, as far as we know, there really were no buildings, except Native American buildings. That makes that first real Dutch building, outside European building, in New York State. The arrival of the Dutch was a very important event. It changed the life of the Indians on the Hudson very quickly, and there were a number of ways in which this happened. First of all, it opened their mind. There were other places they didn't know about, things that they had never dreamed. And then the Dutch brought alcohol. So the natives were introduced for the first time to alcohol and its effects. In addition, Henry Hudson and his crew and the ships that came after him brought tools, hoes, knives, and they brought cloth, which the natives didn't have. So there were ways in which life changed very quickly. It wasn't that the Mohicans needed these things because they were doing quite well, but it was the prestige involved to get your hands on something so new. One thing that happened was that sailors brought smallpox, measles, and other diseases from Europe. And in a very short time, these were passed to the native populations. The result was many died.
The arrival of Europeans is something that has to be looked at from a couple of perspectives. It does mark the beginning of very dramatic changes in the lifestyle of the native people who are here. Changes that are irreversible, and in a lot of cases, in most cases, catastrophic to their culture. From the other point of view, this was a world of promise. The people who arrived here in those early years were courageous people. They were looking for something. Some of them were looking for wealth. Some of them were looking to save souls. Some of them were looking for just a better life. Some of them were looking for freedom. All of those elements come into conflict when somebody has to be dispossessed. And so it's a rocky road. It starts off that way, and unfortunately, for the Native Americans, that era closes that way. not in a flurry of violence, but in just the gradual loss of culture.
The Hudson is a river of contradictions, one of the most abused and admired of the great American rivers. It's a river rich in history. Artists have drawn inspiration from it. Castles and mansions have been built on it. The course of the Hudson is only 320 miles, but on its path to the Atlantic, the river is constantly changing. We'll explore the Hudson from its headwaters to New York Harbor. Our journey begins at the source, or at least one of the many sources for this river, in the heart of the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York. Here, on the shoulders of Mount Marcy, is the highest lake source, Lake Tear of the Clouds. There, a descending brook connects with numerous other streams and rivers to form the wild headwaters of the Hudson, which finds its natural course in a channel carved by glaciers during the Ice Age. But is this really the end of the Hudson? Oceanographers have theorized that before the close of the last ice age, the Hudson actually carved its way another 120 miles to the sea. The river's ancient path leads to the Hudson Canyon, a deep gorge which goes on for another 200 miles. Scientists are still learning about the mysteries of this river, which plays such an important role in the ecology of the coastal zone. The tidal action can be easily observed where a small tributary meets the river. At low tide, the stream is clearly visible. 6 hours later, it disappears under 4.5 feet of the flood tide. The Algonquian Indians, after observing this, called the river Mahicanito,